You're listening to Criticaleye's Inspiring Leaders podcast. Criticaleye is a global membership community with over 2 decades of experience supporting senior executives in their roles. We work with board-level executives, giving them opportunities to build their knowledge, skills, and access independent reference points outside of their immediate networks. Whether you're stepping up into a more senior role or aspiring to do so, looking to hone high-level stakeholder relationships, drive operational performance, build your own personal resilience as a leader, or have longer-term career goals such as moving into a plural career, Criticaleye's approach supports a range of leadership challenges and ambitions.
Welcome to Criticaleye's Inspiring Leaders podcast. My name is Marc Barber, Director of Content at Criticaleye, and today we'll be talking about fueling fast growth. To talk us through this topic, I'm delighted to welcome Deborah Frost, UK Chair for Mercer Master Trust and former CEO of Personal Group and Enecto Reward Consulting. Welcome, Deborah.
Thanks, Mark. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, it's a good time, I think, to be talking about this. I think we're talking to you from our growth company retreat. Basically, a lot of the discussion has been around, I guess, companies restructuring, taking cost out, but also looking at ways to innovate and drive growth. And it's great to have you here today because you've got sort of both perspectives and sort of lenses on this topic from your executive career and also as a non-executive as well. I suppose the opening question, really, and feel free to give us a bit more on your background as well when answering this question, but you've led sort of several organisations with a mandate for growth. If we start with innovation, how important was that in the sort of success for you in those roles?
Yeah, I think in all of the roles that I've had in my exec career, so from the early days of setting up Enecto Reward Consultancy through to then being Chief Exec at Personal Group PLC and then now in my chair role, I think the innovation bit is really the fuel for future growth. So most organisations have a main business, a cash cow that's delivering revenue and profit, but I tend to take it in quite a simple way, and I quite often use the McKinsey model, the 3 horizons for innovation planning. So the first being, what do you do every day? What's the main thing that your business does to make money? That's the first horizon. The second horizon you would describe as something that's already innovative, something that's more bedded in. You can start to see that starting to deliver results, so it's working, it's part of the business. And then the third horizon, and really this is the most difficult and also probably the most important, is what are the seeds that you're planting now that you'll be harvesting over the next 3 to 5 years? And as a CEO, it's really important that you keep your focus out of the day-to-day and the cash generation and think about where are we going and what will be delivering growth in the future. Because it's really easy in the muck and bullets of everyday executive life to get caught up in the noise of what's going on and not take that moment to step back and really think about how are we going to continue to fuel the growth of the business and take it on further. And that whole thing around innovation is trying things, seeing what works, and crucially seeing what works that companies or clients or individuals will actually buy, will part with money for, because you can spend an awful lot of time and effort developing things that in theory sound great, but in practice no one wants to buy. So it's a mixture of both real commercial acumen and also giving the space to create great new ideas in the future.
The third part there of planning or investing in innovation for future growth, it's difficult at the moment, isn't it, given how fast leadership teams are having to run and dealing with the muck and the bullets, as you put it.
Yeah, and I think the risk appetite has massively changed. You know, running a listed business in my exec career, I think when I first went into the role, there was an expectation that some of the profits, the EBITDA that you generated would be reinvested in the business, and you would be using that to develop innovation in the future. But I think we can all see in businesses now that there is more and more emphasis on delivering bottom line results, less importance on developing market share and those sorts of things. People are looking at those results. The challenge with that is if you're driving everything to the bottom line, where's the space for creativity? Where's the space for innovation? Where's the space for developing that third horizon that is what's going to lead to growth in future years? And that whole construct, I think, has become increasingly difficult for execs to manage in very, very difficult and turbulent times. You know, there are so many things that you have to consider at any one time that sometimes the creativity required, the thought space, the ability to just think about where is there a gap in the market, where is there something that we could really do and develop here, it just gets crowded out. But it is probably the most important thing that you have to do as a chief exec.
Thinking back then to when you were CEO, how did you try to install that? Because again, as CEO, you had two very different experiences, didn't you? There was the founder building the business up, and then moving into another company, it was much more of a turnaround situation. So I wondered if you had some sort of reflections on that.
I think as a founder, in many ways, it was easier because, it's your business, you're in charge, you're sort of deciding really what you do in terms of how you wish to invest capital and the return on that capital. And, I was very close to the market. I understood what clients needed. So I had a direct line to what people were willing to pay for and what would be looking for and what could be a commercial opportunity that we could take. And so we developed, alongside our consultancy model, we developed a software platform which gave us then genuine annual recurring revenue and also locked clients into us. So it was when I say it was a no-brainer, building it. The execution of that idea was painful, but the concept and how we wanted to deliver it we knew would work. When you're working in a listed business, you are working with a number of institutional investors, all of whom have different agendas, and you're stakeholder managing a lot of different ideas and different needs from stakeholders. So that creating space for innovation and thinking about how you might invest money quickly, try things out. If it's not working, turn it around, pivot, do something different is much harder. And I definitely recognise now that I'm in a board role and a non-exec role, how hard it is when you're in that exec role to create room for yourself to think about those things, and actually the role the board can play in keeping you honest on that and lifting you out of the day-to-day and really thinking about the future. Yeah, the future of the business. Because let's face it, as a chair, you're in the meetings monthly or quarterly. You have the chance to see how things are really moving and progressing and pick up and talk to the exec team and say, look, we said we were going to try and do this. We don't seem to be making progress because I recognise you're dealing with all this day-to-day stuff, but it's essential for the lifeblood of the business that we're going to continue to innovate and develop stuff in terms of, projecting future growth and future opportunities.
Where do you stand on this idea of fail fast that's talked about a lot? I always wonder about it.
Yeah, fail fast requires, I think, a concept where people are willing to try something in a very low ego way, and if it doesn't work, quickly give it up. And the bigger the business, the more you've got whole teams of people invested in developing an idea, the more people's careers and egos and status are tied up with that, and the less willing they are to accept that it might not work. And so the fastness, the speed of accepting something isn't going to work, I think is key. Because if you get a couple of years into a project and it's clearly not showing results, it's really hard to unpick. So that's my first thing. Think about how they feel about the changes. But secondly, communicate incredibly clearly all the way down. It's no good just talking to your senior team. It's really important that everyone in the business knows if you are experimenting, if you are trying some new ideas, that you might decide to pivot or you might decide to can it completely. Because you can imagine if you're working in an IT team and it feels like every 3 months you're being asked to do something different and then that is stopped and moved and you're doing something else, you just come to the conclusion that the management team, the exec, are headless chickens. And it's not that. It's just that you are deliberately going through a process of innovation and trial. And that's the thing that I think the really clear communication, engaging people with what you're trying to do, can help stop disappointment if you have to can something, or alternatively it can make people more innovative and more thoughtful in the way that they can drive through barriers and constraints.
So the communication around innovation is absolutely vital. And is that something you've sort of learned through experience?
Yes, really learned through experience. And also that probably using constraints to force innovation and imagination and creativity can be really helpful. If you say to someone, look, here's £5 billion, go and build a website, it's a colossal amount of money, and you can really do anything you want. If you say you've got 100,000, now go and build me a an native app and a website that does this, you're forcing people to be much more creative in the way that they solve problems and actually coming up with really original ideas and difference. So I think putting constraints in place, giving people quite a tight brief, seeing how they come up with some delivery is the way that you can drive breakthroughs. But accepting that the breakthrough may be a brilliant idea, but if no one wants to buy it, then it's something that will fail fast and move on to the next iteration.
Almost kill your darlings.
Kill your darlings.
Low egos. I thought that's quite an interesting point. I'll make a generalisation. CEOs tend to have egos.
Yeah, I don't think anyone gets to be a CEO unless you've
right.
got an ego. You have to believe in yourself.
Exactly. So just some thoughts around there. How do you sort of manage that process? I'm guessing it perhaps feeds into the idea of also having a good board to have the conversations. But how do you get that right in those conversations? Because we all do have egos, obviously.
Yeah, I think it's creating an environment, and I'm not going to say that CEOs don't have egos. You almost need that, I think, to be in any senior role. You have to believe that what you're doing is effective, because otherwise I don't think you could do it. But I think there are people that have a thin skin, and they're quite prickly, and they're very, very defensive about controlling their territory. And those people in particular find it very difficult to adjust if they feel that their territory is being taken away from them. So establishing clarity around, this is your division, but we might need to change it, the board might decide to change it, and involving people in that process, I think, makes it easier. So you don't tie up everything that you are, your status, your role, all of these things into something which has the potential 9 months down the road to be changed or pivoted. So that creating that environment of, we understand this is difficult and we want you to try really hard, but knowing it might not work, it's a really difficult culture to engender. That's why companies really struggle with innovation. If it was easy, everyone would be able to do it really well. It's hard.
What's your experience around M&A? Because that can be used as a way to drive innovation.
Yes, it's been interesting on the retreat that we've been on. We've spoken a lot about how M&A can sort of leapfrog transformation, but there can be that real culture clash. So the typical thing that companies want to do is they might buy a very innovative business, and they use that to leapfrog on technology or customer insight or even to acquire different clients. But the thing that is really difficult is then how do you inculcate the cultures between the two businesses? And we see, you don't need me to tell you the stats of failed M&As, but a huge amount of it is because there's a disconnect between what the owners of the smaller business coming into your business think and believe is going to happen. And let's not forget that if you work for a boutique or very small sort of startup technology business, there's fun and excitement and drive in that, and then suddenly you get sold into a bigger business and all the things that you really enjoyed are subsumed into this wider business.
Yep.
So thinking about that culture fit and how you can protect the business, particularly if you've bought it for innovation reasons, is absolutely crucial to making that effective, and it is hard. And
Does that need to be tagged on the board? Because you can get sort of wrapped up in the deal, but that sort of integration side of it can sort of slip away, can't it?
Yeah, I think having really effective implementation planning and also having the board and the non-execs being involved in thinking about how we wanted this M&A activity or this acquisition activity to work can be helpful, because they can keep an eye on, is this progressing as we thought? Are we seeing danger signs here, what I call pink flags? They're not red, but they're not white either or green. They're starting to turn into red flags. So are we seeing some people leaving from the organisation that we've acquired? Are we seeing the sort of small signs of people clearly not enjoying it and not happy? And that's where perhaps a non-exec director can be much less threatening maybe than an exec. They can chat and find out what's going on in that business and then report back into the board and say, this is going great, they love it. Or alternatively, there's some things here I'm not quite sure about. And that can start to unpick things before they really fall apart.
You've had private company experience and listed company experience. Has that impacted on a company's ability to innovate?
Yeah, I mean, our personal group was listed on AIM, or is still listed on AIM, and the challenge, I think, from an AIM perspective is that up until very recently, you've been able to hold those funds in an IHT fund, so it protects from inheritance tax if you hold it for 2 years. So you can see a lot of people wanting to shift their assets into assets or into equities on AIM. But the challenge with that is they probably want some income from that investment that they've made. And so when you're held in an inheritance tax fund, which a personal group was held in a number of places, there is a really strong drive from your institutional investors to return dividends because they are then able to pay their shareholders some income. And so the challenge is always, how am I going to hit my bottom line in order to deliver what we've agreed with our investors? And certainly if you've got a progressive dividend, as we had for a time at PG, you're increasing that amount each year. So it is very, very challenging to be in that environment, and the inevitable consequence can be that you don't ring fence enough money for innovation. And there, back to the start of the conversation, you're missing out on planting those seeds, your Horizon 3 seeds, which will harvest in later years, and that will eventually lead to the business not growing anymore. So it's a really challenging situation to manage, and I feel for AIM CEOs at the moment, they're in an extremely difficult position, and really can only hope that things ease a little bit so that they are in a position where they can put some more investment back into innovation.
What's the culture you're trying to create to get this right? Again, it can be a kind of nebulous term, and it means different things in different organisations, but where have you seen it? Where do you think you've got that balance right between delivering on the day-to-day and then thinking ahead, having that ability to work on the horizon?
In my consulting days, I used to work quite a lot for Channel 4, and they are an incredibly innovative organisation. They have as their sort of main, I think they've changed them, but at the time they had values around, we're not afraid to stick our necks out, we don't do just because. And I think when you're signalling that level of innovation around, we are willing to make mistakes, to try things, it might not work, you're giving permission to the whole organisation to not just do things that are different, but also hold their leaders to account and say, but hang on a minute, you said we could try and do different things. So being really clear that innovation is welcome here, and accepting that things will go wrong and you might fail and you might have to shut down projects, is really important. And if you don't then follow that through, so if you then end up firing people because it's failed, or you blame people, then what people can see is actually this business doesn't live up to its values. It talks about innovation, but really, if anything goes wrong, you get punished for it. So it's very important to recognise and create that culture of, we know that things won't work out the first time. We know we probably will have to have another go, another iteration. And it could be that this brilliant idea actually isn't a brilliant idea, and we might have to can the whole thing. And that is very difficult when companies are trying to manage their costs so hard. It's very, very difficult to manage those twin drivers, both of innovation and cost management at the same time.
What do you think the questions chairs need to be asking then to work with CEOs? Because you get into an interesting area as a board there. How are you sort of ensuring that those conversations are happening? And that the management team are thinking about it.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think the board are there to really help the exec keep their eye on the main thing, because there are so many things distracting the exec from day to day. It might be customer complaints, it might be a client's run into some problems, it might be an IT problem. But the board are there to try and help the exec keep their gaze up and think about the longer term implications of the decisions that they're making, and also to help the management team evaluate those decisions on a regular basis. Are we going in the right way? We said we were going to deliver this. Is it still relevant? Is this still where we want to go? Because they're not so consumed by the day-to-day, I think the role of the board is to ask questions about, are we still making the main thing, but also questions around how can we go faster? So a good question, I think, from the board is something around perhaps, if we had another £1 million to invest in this, what would we do? What would happen? What would go faster? What would be the outcome? So to probably challenge the management team to think outside of where they are at the moment, to think a bit bigger, to think a bit faster, and then decide whether it is worth putting another £1 million into it or not. So the board have that ability and that privilege to stand back and to help the exec and the CEO really consider where they want to go.
Did you ever get frustrated as a CEO that the board weren't moving fast enough?
Show me a CEO who isn't frustrated by their board.
Well, so you
I'll
talk
show
to
you a
chairs
liar.
and they say the CEO isn't moving fast enough, and then you speak to a CEO, and
I think to be fair, I mean, I've been really lucky with the chairs that I had at PG. They were both very different but excellent. And I think the challenge that you face is that when you're standing back, you can really clearly see what needs to happen. And when you're in the middle of it, you can still clearly see what needs to happen, but just getting to it is very different, very difficult. And so there is ripe, room there for disagreements and frustration, I think, on both sides. But it comes back down to signing up to an agreement and clarity about what do our goals look like and how we're going to achieve them, and then being realistic about how you can progress those. So it's by the very nature of it, it's set up to be frustrating, isn't it? The chief exec isn't being given free rein to do whatever they want, and that's right. The chair and the board are there to provide some balance and some regulation and some sort of mitigation around that. But at the same time, the board can see clearly that perhaps we're slipping on targets that we agreed, or we're not delivering what we thought we would.
it wants a healthy degree of tension.
Exactly. The tension is really important, but it does sometimes make it uncomfortable.
Okay. Mindful of time, what's the one piece of advice you'd give to a CEO preparing a business for growth? Just build out on that a little bit. I guess, again, in the context of where we are today, we've heard it at the retreat, where, I mean, there is so much focus on taking cost out. There's so much focus on restructuring. What are your sort of thoughts around for CEOs when they're looking at, okay, we've got to try and drive growth in some way? What's the conversation you need to be having?
I think there are probably two things. One is look at your horizon. So are we driving the most out of our horizon one? So that's the established business. Do we really understand operationally how that works? Are there tweaks that we can make to make it more successful? What's our pricing like? What's our marketing like? Can we do better with that? And then on the innovation side, fundamentally, you have to build a product or a service that companies will buy from you, or individuals will buy from you. And the thing where it goes wrong is you build something which feels brilliant, but actually no one wants to part with money for, or they just see it as an adjunct to your main product that they expect to be rolled in for nothing. And that's the hardest thing. So those two things, what can you do in the main business to make it more successful, and what can you do on the innovation side to create something that really leaps the business forward?
Thinking about the customer as well.
You have to. It's absolutely at the centre of it, because if your customer doesn't want to buy something and they don't see the value of it, they won't spend the money on it. So that's the fundamental thing. You start with what does the client need, and what does the client need to the point where they're willing to exchange money for ease or a new product or new insights. And if they're not willing to do that, then it's not going to work. So starting with your client, starting with your customer is where it all begins. And that's the most important advice around innovation. Don't get carried away.
Thank you, Deborah. As I mentioned at the start, this episode is part of Criticaleye's Inspiring Leaders series, which can be found on Podbean, Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Please do subscribe to our channel to be notified of new episodes. Plus, for more information about how we support growth company leaders, as well as senior leadership teams at Criticaleye, please visit our website at www.criticaleye.com.